He had everything: wealth, power, fame, yet no woman ever touched his heart. Everyone tried to win him, but he stayed cold until one quiet nurse changed everything. What she did for his wheelchair-bound mother will leave you speechless. Stay tuned because you're about to watch a beautiful story and find out what happened next. Hello, family. Welcome to Tales Haven. Kindly subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. Ethan Maxwell was not just a billionaire. He was the most private and mysterious man in all of New York. At 35, he owned a group of high-end hospitals, luxury properties across the country, and a fast-growing tech company. People called him the Cold King, not because he was rude, but because he had never been seen with a woman more than once. He lived in the tallest penthouse in Manhattan, wore the cleanest suits, and walked with a kind of confidence that made people go quiet when he entered a room. Everyone respected him. Many feared him, but very few truly knew him. Women chased him like a prize. Some were fashion models with glossy magazine covers. Some were celebrities with millions of followers. Some were daughters of other billionaires, introduced to him through business dinners. They came in expensive gowns, wearing heavy makeup and practiced smiles. They complimented his watch, pretended to like his hobbies, and laughed at jokes that weren't even funny. But Ethan could see through all of it. They didn't see him. They only saw his wealth. So again and again he politely said no. And again people gossiped. He's probably too proud. Maybe he's not into women. Or maybe he's already in love with his money. None of them knew the truth. Ethan Maxwell had once believed in love, until the woman he thought he would marry tried to steal from his mother's inheritance. Since then, he locked his heart like a vault. He worked. He protected his family. And he promised himself, no one gets close again unless they're real. The only person Ethan truly loved was his mother, Margaret Maxwell. She was once a strong, lively woman with a big smile and a voice full of warmth. But after a car accident 2 years ago, she had been left paralyzed from the waist down. Now she used a wheelchair and spent most of her days inside the house, surrounded by nurses and quiet halls. Ethan visited her every day without fail. No matter how busy he was, he always made time. He would wrap her in a warm shawl, bring her favorite tea, and sit by her side, even if she had nothing to say. "You need a wife, Ethan," Margaret would say softly from her wheelchair. "Someone with a good heart, someone to care for you, the way you care for me." "I'm fine, Mom," Ethan would smile, brushing her hand. "You're all I need." But the truth? He felt empty sometimes. His wealth filled every room, except his heart. One cold Monday morning, everything began to change. Margaret had slipped while trying to move from her wheelchair to the bed. Though it wasn't serious, Ethan panicked and had her taken to the hospital, his own hospital, just to be sure. "I want the best nurses. No mistakes," Ethan said firmly to the staff. She was admitted into a private suite with all the best equipment. But Ethan didn't relax. He stayed with her the whole night. The next morning, around 8 a.m., Ethan left the hospital briefly for a business call. When he returned an hour later, he walked toward his mother's room as usual, calm, quiet, and serious. But then he stopped at the door. Something unexpected was happening inside. His mother was laughing. Not a little giggle. A full, joyful belly laugh. Ethan frowned slightly. He couldn't remember the last time she laughed like that. Curious, he peeked into the room without stepping in. And that's when he saw her. The young nurse standing by his mother's bedside. She wasn't like the others. She wore a plain uniform, her shoes soft against the floor. Her brown skin glowed in the morning light, and her thick curls were pulled up into a neat bun. But it wasn't her looks that caught Ethan's attention. It was her kindness. She was gently helping Margaret with her blanket, adjusting the pillows, and smiling like they were old friends. "There. Comfy now?" the nurse asked. Margaret grinned. "If you fluff that pillow one more time, I might fall asleep and miss my show." Both of them laughed. Ethan felt something strange in his chest. He had hired many nurses before. Some were cold. Some were fake. Most did just what was needed, nothing more. But this one, she was different. He cleared his throat and stepped in. The laughter stopped as both women turned to him. "Good morning, Mom," Ethan said, walking in. His eyes gently moved to the nurse. "And you must be new." The nurse stood up straight and gave a calm smile. "Yes, sir. My name is Naomi Brooks. I was transferred from City West Hospital just last week." Ethan nodded slowly. "I see." Margaret spoke up quickly. "She's amazing, Ethan. She doesn't just care, she connects. I feel like I've known her for years." Naomi smiled shyly. "It's easy to care when the patient is so sweet." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then finally said, "Nice to meet you, Naomi." He sat beside his mother, but his eyes drifted back to Naomi as she quietly picked up a chart and walked toward the door. Something about her stayed with him. The way she spoke. The way she treated his mother. No spotlight. No show. Just pure, gentle care. Ethan didn't know it yet, but something had already begun. Not a business deal. Not a date with a supermodel. But something real. Something soft and powerful. Something called love. And for Ethan, that meant everything. "Are you okay, son?" Margaret asked, glancing at him curiously. He looked up quickly. "Yeah, just checking my emails." She smiled knowingly. "It's not your phone that has your attention. It's Naomi." Ethan laughed softly. "Is it that obvious? To a mother?" "Yes." She leaned back against her pillow and added, "You've been surrounded by fake people for so long. It's nice to see someone who makes you pause." Ethan looked down at his hands, silent. He didn't want to admit it, but his mother was right. Naomi had only been in their lives for one day, and already, something felt different. That afternoon, when Naomi returned with Margaret's medications, Ethan stayed in the room instead of stepping out like he usually did. He watched her. She greeted his mother kindly, helped her into her wheelchair with careful hands, and even tied Margaret's scarf loosely around her neck, so the hospital air wouldn't chill her. Ethan stood up and offered to help, but Naomi smiled and said, "It's all right. I've got her." There was no pride in her voice, just gentle confidence. Ethan was used to people trying to impress him, saying the right things, acting like they needed him. But Naomi didn't ask for anything, not even his attention. That made him want to give it even more. Later that day, Ethan quietly called the hospital director to ask a few questions. "Tell me about Nurse Naomi Brooks," he said over the phone. The director didn't ask why. He simply replied, "Transferred here last week. Strong work ethic. Clean record. No complaints." Ethan asked again, more personal this time. "What's her story?" The director paused. "I believe she's from Brooklyn. Comes from a humble background. Lost her father at a young age. She's been supporting her mother and younger siblings ever since. Very focused. Doesn't ask for much." Ethan nodded to himself, then quietly said, "Thank you." He hung up the call and stood at the window of the hospital hallway. So that was the kind of woman Naomi was. Quiet strength, not loud status. That explained the peace she carried. That explained why his mother liked her so quickly. The next morning, Ethan arrived early, earlier than usual. He wore a plain gray sweater and left his driver downstairs. He didn't want to draw attention today. When he walked into Margaret's room, Naomi was already there. She was helping Margaret do some light stretches, encouraging her with soft words. "That's it, one arm at a time. You're doing great." Ethan stood quietly at the door for a moment. Naomi didn't notice him yet, but Margaret did, and she smiled knowingly again. When Naomi finally turned, she straightened up quickly. "Good morning, Mr. Maxwell." Ethan raised a hand gently. "Please call me Ethan." Naomi gave a respectful nod. "All right, Ethan." He moved closer to the bed and greeted his mother with a light kiss on the cheek. "You're looking stronger today." "Because someone here is good at her job," Margaret said proudly, gesturing to Naomi. Naomi smiled humbly and stepped aside. "I'll go prepare her morning meds." As she left the room, Ethan's eyes followed her out. His mother noticed, of course. "She's different, isn't she?" Margaret asked softly. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Very." You've met a lot of women, Ethan. Rich ones. Famous ones. But this one, she speaks to your soul. I can tell. He sighed. She doesn't even care who I am. And that's why she's worth knowing, Margaret whispered. Ethan was quiet again. He wasn't sure what this feeling was, gentle, yet strong. But one thing was clear. He didn't want it to go away. Later that afternoon, Ethan walked out of his mother's room and stood silently in the hallway. His hands were in his pockets, and his eyes kept glancing toward the nurse's station. Naomi was there, checking her patient chart, speaking politely to an older nurse, and smiling softly when a child passed by in a wheelchair. She looked calm, focused, peaceful. Ethan had seen women wear diamonds, silk gowns, red lipstick, and still look lost. But Naomi, in her simple blue scrubs and rubber shoes, looked like she carried light. And he wanted to know her. Really know her. He slowly walked up to her, heart steady but nerves dancing just a little. "Hi," he said casually. Naomi looked up, surprised but calm.
"Oh.
"Hello, Ethan." He smiled. "You have a break coming up?" She checked her watch. 10 minutes, yes. "Would you join me for coffee?" "Just across the street," he asked, careful not to sound too forward. "It's not a date. Just a thank you for taking such good care of my mom." Naomi paused, studying him for a moment. "All right," she finally said. "But only if you let me pay for my own coffee." Ethan chuckled.
"Deal."
They walked together across the street to a small cafe with warm lights and wooden chairs. No one expected to see a billionaire there, but Ethan didn't care. He even held the door open for Naomi and let her choose the seat by the window. Naomi ordered a simple cup of black coffee. Ethan chose the same. When they sat down, there was silence for a few seconds, not awkward, just thoughtful. Then Naomi asked, "Why did you ask me out for coffee, really?" Ethan looked at her, honest. "Because I wanted to know the woman who made my mother laugh. And because I think you're different." Naomi sipped her coffee. "Different how?" "You're not trying to impress anyone," he said quietly. "You don't act like I'm some trophy to win. That's rare." She smiled. "Why would I? I see you take care of your mother, like gold. That tells me more than your last name ever could." Ethan blinked, surprised at her answer. He leaned forward slightly. "You know, most people I meet want something from me." Naomi nodded. "That's what happens when the world knows your bank account before your heart." He smiled slowly. "You're smart." "I try to be," she said, sipping again. "But mostly, I try to be kind." Ethan looked at her, and for a long moment, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Naomi wasn't like the women who came to his parties in glass heels, hoping to leave with his attention. She didn't need anything from him. And maybe that was what drew him the most. After their coffee, Ethan walked her back to the hospital. The sky had turned orange with evening light, and traffic passed slowly on the street. Just before they crossed the road, Naomi stopped. "Ethan," she said softly, "you're kind, but I hope you're not mistaking kindness for something else." He turned to her, serious but gentle. "I don't move fast, Naomi, but when I feel something, I know it's real." Naomi looked down, then back up. "That's fair." Then she added with a small smile, "I'm not against getting to know you, but I don't need a prince. Just honesty." Ethan nodded. "That's all I've ever wanted to give," he said. They reached the hospital door and stood quietly for a second. "Thanks for the coffee," Naomi said. "Thanks for the company," Ethan replied. She walked back inside, calm as ever. But Ethan remained at the door for a moment longer. Something was growing. Not loud, not flashy, but deep. And for the first time in years, Ethan wasn't afraid of it. He welcomed it. Because real love, like Naomi, didn't need a stage. It only needed truth. The next few days at the hospital were filled with small, quiet moments between Ethan and Naomi. They didn't call each other. They didn't text. But every time Ethan came to visit his mom, Naomi would be there, bringing tea, adjusting Margaret's pillows, or simply chatting about the news. And every time Naomi smiled, Ethan's day felt lighter. But while their friendship grew softly, the hospital walls began to whisper. "She's always around him," one nurse said behind the supply closet door. I heard they had coffee together, another added. A third rolled her eyes. She must be aiming to marry rich. Just wait. Naomi heard bits of it, little snickers behind her back, strange looks when she passed the nurse's lounge, and sudden silence when she entered a room. At first she ignored it. She was a professional after all. But by the third day, the whispers became heavier, like invisible stones pressing against her heart. She was just doing her job. She cared deeply for Margaret, and yes, she had started to care for Ethan too. But she hadn't asked for any of this attention. She hadn't tried to steal anyone's spotlight. That evening, as she walked out of Margaret's room, she bumped into Ethan in the hallway. He noticed the look on her face immediately. Something wrong, he asked. Naomi gave a polite smile, but her voice was tight. People are talking. Ethan frowned. About us. She nodded. They think I'm here for your money. Some say I'm trying to climb the ladder. It's exhausting. Ethan stepped aside with her into a quiet hallway corner. I'm sorry, he said gently. That's not fair. You didn't ask for any of this. Naomi looked down. I don't want to be a story people laugh about. He paused. Then he said something she didn't expect. Let me fix it. Naomi blinked. How? I'll show them the truth, he said, eyes steady. That I'm the one chasing you, not the other way around. She chuckled but softly. You're serious? I've never been more serious, Ethan said. The next day, during the hospital lunch break, the nurses filled the cafeteria as usual. Some chatted over sandwiches. Others checked their phones. Then the door opened, and everything went silent. Ethan Maxwell walked in. But this time, he wasn't wearing his usual sharp suit. He wore a plain black sweater, jeans, and sneakers. No bodyguard. No assistant. Just Ethan. And in his hand, 2 cups of coffee. Every nurse turned to watch him. He walked directly to Naomi, who sat quietly in a far corner alone. Without saying a word, he placed one of the coffees in front of her and sat down beside her. Some people gasped. Others pulled out their phones, pretending not to record. Ethan ignored them all. He looked at Naomi and said softly, Room for one more? Naomi couldn't help it, she smiled. And the entire cafeteria saw it. But to Ethan, the room had gone quiet. All he saw was her. Naomi leaned forward and whispered, You really didn't have to do that. I wanted to, he whispered back. Because people need to see what I already know, that you matter. And not because of who I am, but because of who you are. Naomi blinked back a tear. You make it hard not to fall for you, you know. Ethan smiled. That's the plan. And in that moment, surrounded by whispers and phones and eyes, Naomi stopped caring about what people thought. Because Ethan had made a choice. A public one. And in return, she made one of her own. She gently placed her hand on top of his and left it there. Not because of pressure. Not because of fear. But because it felt right. Naomi's hand remained gently on top of Ethan's as the hospital cafeteria slowly returned to normal. Some staff tried to pretend they weren't watching. Others whispered quietly, still surprised that the billionaire had just chosen to sit with a nurse, openly, without hiding it. But Ethan didn't care. And neither did Naomi. They talked over coffee for the next 20 minutes, smiling like old friends and laughing like people who had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. After their break, Naomi returned to her duties, but everything had changed. The way people looked at her was different, not out of judgment, but quiet respect. She hadn't chased fame. She hadn't worn fancy clothes. She simply stayed true to herself. That was what made her stand out. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Naomi returned to Margaret's room to help her get ready for bed. The warm lamp beside the bed glowed gently, casting a golden light over the room. Today was interesting, Margaret said with a smile, folding her blanket over her lap. Naomi smiled. Yes, it was. Margaret looked at her carefully. Can I tell you something? Naomi nodded. Margaret reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. Before you came, I was starting to lose hope. Not just in my body, but in my son. He's been lonely for so long, and he's never let anyone in, not really. Naomi remained still, listening. Margaret continued, her voice softer now. I prayed. Every night. I didn't pray for a rich woman, or a famous one. I just asked God to send someone kind, someone who would love my son, not his money. Naomi blinked quickly, her throat tightening. Margaret smiled again. I didn't expect it would be a nurse with gentle hands and honest eyes. But I think God sent you. Naomi looked down, tears quietly gathering in her eyes. You don't even know everything about me. I know enough, Margaret whispered. And so does Ethan. Naomi swallowed, her voice barely steady. I didn't plan any of this. I was just doing my job. And now you're doing more than that, Margaret replied. You're healing hearts, not just mine. Just then, the door opened and Ethan walked in with a bag of Margaret's favorite banana muffins. Guess who brought dessert? He said with a grin. He saw Naomi's watery eyes and immediately slowed his steps. Everything okay? Naomi quickly wiped her face. Yes. Your mom is just full of surprises. Margaret chuckled. Oh, you have no idea. Ethan handed over the muffins and pulled up a chair beside Naomi, quietly joining their circle. They ate together, talked about silly things, watched a classic movie on the small TV in the room. Naomi helped Margaret adjust her wheelchair, and Ethan gently placed a shawl around his mother's shoulders when the room got chilly. At one point, Naomi looked around the room and smiled. Not because it was fancy, but because it felt like home. Later that week, Ethan invited Naomi to dinner, this time at his penthouse. No pressure, he said. Just dinner. You, me, and Mom. Simple. Naomi hesitated, but Margaret clapped her hands with joy. Please say yes. I've had enough hospital food. So, Naomi said yes. On Saturday evening, she wore a simple navy blue dress and flat black shoes. Her curls were tied in a soft bun, and she carried a small handbag, nervous but composed. Ethan opened the door himself when she arrived. He wore a charcoal gray shirt and dark jeans. No suit, no tie, just him. You look beautiful, he said. Naomi blushed softly. Thank you. You look not like a billionaire tonight. Perfect, he smiled. Inside, Margaret sat in the cozy living room, wearing a deep green shawl and her favorite necklace. The lights were soft, the dining table was warm with candles, and soft jazz played in the background. Dinner was simple, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and fruit pie. But the conversation was full of joy. Margaret told old stories of Ethan's childhood, how he used to cry when his robot toys broke, or how he once built a fort in the kitchen out of breadsticks and chairs. Naomi laughed until her stomach hurt. After dessert, while Margaret rested in her room, Ethan and Naomi stepped onto the wide balcony. The city lights sparkled below, cars moved like fireflies, and the breeze was cool and peaceful. I'm glad you came, Ethan said, looking out over the skyline. Naomi nodded. I'm glad I stayed. He turned to her slowly. There's something I've been meaning to say, he began. I don't want to rush anything, but every time I'm with you, I feel like I'm becoming a better man. Naomi's eyes softened. I've been around money my whole life, he continued, but you remind me what it means to be rich in the heart. Naomi looked up at him, her voice gentle. You don't need to say the perfect words, Ethan. Just be honest. He took a step closer. Then here's the truth, he said. I'm falling for you. And not because you're beautiful or kind, but because when I look at you, I feel peace. Naomi felt her chest flutter. And for the first time, she didn't feel scared. Slowly, she whispered, I'm falling too. And under the city lights, without a camera, without a crowd, Ethan kissed her. Not like a billionaire, but like a man who had finally found something real. Naomi and Ethan stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the city glowing behind them. Her hands rested gently in his, and though no fancy words were spoken, something real passed between them. It was not a moment made for headlines or cameras, but for hearts that had waited a long time to feel safe again. From that evening on, things began to change. But not in the loud, flashy way people expected from a billionaire. There were no grand news announcements. No celebrity parties. No magazine photos. Just two people, falling deeper into something steady and true. Ethan kept visiting the hospital, but not only to see his mother. Sometimes he brought Naomi her favorite snacks. Other times he brought flowers to place at the nurse's station, not expensive bouquets, but wildflowers he picked himself from the Maxwell estate garden. Naomi, in return, brought Ethan something he had never received before: peace. When he had stressful meetings, she would send him short notes. Remember to breathe. You've already made it through harder days. Dinner's on me, meaning I'll cook noodles and make you laugh. And when Naomi's mother fell sick again, Ethan didn't just send money. He showed up. He carried bags into the house, helped clean dishes, and sat beside her mother, listening to her stories with full attention. Naomi's younger siblings, 2 boys and 1 girl, took to him like an older brother. One day, they asked him if he really had a robot in his office. He laughed and promised to bring it next time. It wasn't perfect. They were from 2 different worlds. But somehow it worked, because what connected them wasn't money, it was meaning. But the world, as always, had something to say. A few weeks later, the gossip blogs found out about Naomi. One article called her the nurse who captured a billionaire's heart. Another twisted it cruelly: a woman from the streets walking into a penthouse, genius or gold digger? Naomi read the headlines quietly in her apartment. She didn't cry, but her heart ached. She had never wanted fame. She only wanted love. That night, she left a letter on Ethan's desk and slipped out quietly. Ethan, I never chased your wealth. But if being with me puts a weight on your shoulders, then I'd rather carry mine alone. Please forgive me. Naomi. Ethan returned home late and saw the note. His chest tightened. His heart dropped. He didn't wait a minute. He ran to his car and drove through the city with no security, no driver, just raw panic in his chest. He reached Naomi's small apartment around midnight and knocked once. Twice. The door opened slowly. Naomi stood there, dressed in a hoodie and slippers, eyes red from holding back tears. You came, she whispered. Of course I came, Ethan said, stepping inside. What were you thinking, leaving that letter? I didn't want to ruin your name, she said. You worked so hard to build it. People say I don't belong. I don't care what they say, he cut in. She looked up, blinking fast. You're not ruining anything, he continued. You made me better. You brought peace to my life. You healed my mother's heart. And mine too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a gold ring. Simple. No diamond. Just a thin band with one word carved inside. Home. Naomi covered her mouth in shock. Ethan's voice was soft. This isn't about status. Or money. Or who belongs where. He looked straight into her eyes. It's about love. And the fact that I never want to go another day without you. Then gently, no crowd, no cameras, he dropped to one knee. Naomi Brooks, will you marry me? Tears slipped down her cheeks as she nodded, smiling. Yes. 100 times yes. 6 months later, the wedding was held in Margaret Maxwell's backyard garden. It wasn't big. It wasn't loud. There were no gold decorations. No celebrity guests. Just laughter, music, soft petals, and heartfelt vows. Margaret sat in her wheelchair wearing a beautiful silver dress, holding back tears of joy. Naomi wore a white lace gown with flat shoes and carried wildflowers in her hand. As they said their vows under the evening sky, Ethan whispered, You weren't just the nurse who cared for my mother, you were the one who cared for my soul. And Naomi replied, You weren't the billionaire I expected. You were the man I didn't know I needed. That night, after the guests had gone, and the music faded, Naomi stood barefoot on the grass, looking up at the stars. Ethan walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. You okay? He asked. I'm more than okay, she smiled. I'm home. And in that quiet moment, under the open sky, Ethan finally realized. He had turned down every woman who wanted his money. But he had said yes to the only one who saw his heart. And that was love no fortune could ever buy. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories. Like and share this video to your friends and loved ones. Your support and engagement encourage me to post more videos. Thanks for watching.